In order to be a patriot, you don't need to study anything. You just have to feel emotions. For astronomy, you could say, yeah, that was the Indian branch of, something that had an Egyptian branch and a Chinese branch and so on. Linguistics was totally Indian. You see, they invited the chanters, the reciters of the Vedas, come settle here. We give you special neighborhoods, special villages, we give you tax exemption and so on. We want you to come and confer the prestige of the Vedas on our dynasty.
The question which I want to ask you now is, there has been terminology that has been used in India for changing the name. Like, should we call it India or should we call it Bharat? Because Bharat, it has our own name.
Get together presided over by the president of Vedaland. Now that would have been a shock. And there would be a communal
Namaste. I am Sameer Pande, Center for Indic Studies, Indus University, Ahmedabad. I welcome you all. So we all know that history is not just the past. It is the foundation upon which civilizations rise and fall, the mirror in which society sees themselves, and an academic battlefield where narratives are shaped, they are challenged, and they are rewritten. Welcome to this special edition of our podcast, Academic Polarity, Narratives, Truths, and Frameworks. So, we are going to talk with Dr. Koenraad Elst, who is a scholar, historian, and a fearless truth seeker who has dedicated his life to dismantling distortions, decolonizing historical narratives, and reviving India's lost intellectual traditions. For decades, Dr. Elst has stood as a rare voice who has challenged with his uncompromising pursuit of truth. For decades, Dr. Koenraad Elst has stood as a rarest voice in academic, uncompromising in his pursuit of truth, undeterred by ideological resistance, and unafraid to challenge the dominant narratives. His work on Hindutva, Indian history, and Indology have redefined how we understand our past and how it is impacting our present. In this conversation, we are going to explore three fundamental pillars on which academic polarity stands. First is the framework, second is the narratives, and third is the truth. So, I welcome you, Dr. Koenraad Elst, to this podcast, and I'm very awestruck from your presence, and I'm very glad that it is my opportunity that you give so much time to us. So, before beginning to our podcast, I was also awestruck from your Sanskritic hymns that you were singing. So, we would like audience to have those lines. Can you please, sir, begin with that?
You mean with Sham no mitra sham varunaha Sham no bhavatvari amma Sham na indro barhaspatihi Sham no vishnurukrama Namo brahmane Namaste Vayo Tvameva pratyaksham brahmasi Tvameva pratyaksham brahma vadishyami Artam vadishyami Satyam vadishyami Tan mamavatu Tad vaktaramavatu Avatu mam Avatu vaktaram Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. With apologies, of course, for all the phonetic inaccuracies I've taken some courses in Vedic chanting with Shantala. Shantala, what's her name? Sri Ramaya or something from Bengaluru. A Paka Smarta Brahmin. She knows how to do it. But she knows. I mean, I only learned a little bit. And so there in Brussels, you find plenty of people who take yoga courses and have, learned a bit of chanting like here. But, from the viewpoint of proper Vedic chanting, it's a bit hairy, let's say.
It's good, sir.
So I, one day, if time permits, I hope to be able to do it better.
It's very kind of you, sir. And it starts how Vedas say, Upanishad. I am sitting near to you, listening to your knowledge, and I am learning a lot from you, sir. So, sir, let's begin with my first curiosity about your life. That how are you looking at the evolution of indological studies from the beginning of your pursuit of this knowledge to now? What is the change or what is the evolution that you are experiencing?
Well, one thing I've experienced in my home university is the declining importance of Oriental studies in general. The start was in about 1300 with Raimundus Lulus, who knew Arabic. And so he meant to use it for converting the Arabs. And so that's how the church also saw it. Not that he got far. There was also Kleinartusis from my area. And so he actually went to Morocco. So there on the town square, he started preaching Christianity. He survived, but he got beaten up. And he had to flee. And he died later from his wounds. But okay, he was he was really an Orientalist, as the church liked to see them. So in the beginning, it was part of the church operation. It was a diplomatic channel vis-a-vis, on the one hand, the Eastern churches, the Armenians and Ethiopians and so on, and then the Arabs, both Christian Arabs, and then the enemy. Then, as larger and larger parts of the East became known, and more languages were added. So at one point Sanskrit, then later the vernaculars, also the Dravidian languages. But that was a topic of general interest in the 19th century. But after that, I don't know. At any rate, after the war, I'd say it only went downhill. And then specifically in my university, I remember when I was a student, they were busy liquidating all the Eastern Christian languages, Georgian and Aramaic and so on. Aramaic they kept for Bible studies. But then after I had studied Indology, they liquidated Indology completely. Indeed, my PhD defense was about the last event in the history of Indology in Leuven, Belgium. So if ever they write the history of that Indology department, my name will be in the subtitle. Well, then they abolished Persian and Iranian, and then they abolished the Slavic department. I mean, like it's as if it's unimportant. It's only Russian. We don't need it. And not Turkish. I mean, you would think, all these languages are more important now than ever before. Well, clearly somebody up there thinks differently. You see, if it doesn't make any money, then we won't invest in it. So what remains is Arabic, Chinese, Japanese, and then to a large extent, those studies are being paid for by the countries concerned, or by companies from those countries, and so on. So I'd say that Orientalism is not really a priority. So that has to do with the general downgrading of the humanities as a whole. The humanities is really a specialism typical for the Renaissance period. And when they discovered really Greek and Hebrew, and so in the 20th century already, and so now only more so, that's like being disparaged, and the STEM departments are far more important. Well, there is a bit of an exception. There is a bit of a revival of Sanskrit in Germany and in the British Islands. Though more at the level of language learning than of real philology. So, I mean, like famous Sanskrit chairs in places like Oxford have been abolished. But so for, ordinary language learning, that is still alive. And there are, most Western cities have some courses privately taught somewhere of Sanskrit.
So that's how Sanskrit has been revived there as a language, not the philosophical or other style. So you came to India in which year? Like 1988?
1988, yes.
So how is your experience of understanding Indology and how you started understanding the core of India and how the culture and civilization? So what was your experience?
You see, I came here without any interest in India. You see, I was interested in Sanskritic philosophy, but that implies no interest in the country concerned. I mean, if you study Socrates, you don't per se have to go to Athens.
True.
So I thought, you can study Kumaralabhata or Yajnavalkya or so in the comfort of your own home. Why go to India?
Yes, that's the question.
Anyway, so I ended up going. Then, of course, it was love at first sight. Yes. And then I was still not interested in today's India, but that didn't last long because I discovered the whole communal problem. And this was the time of the Salman Rushdie affair. Remember that? Well, that was before your time.
Yes, I was born much later than that.
But so there was the ban on the satanic verses,
True.
triggered by the Ayodhya affair, and namely by the initiative of Syed Shahabuddin, the convener of the Babri Masjid Movement Coordination Committee, which was a rival to the Babri Masjid Action Committee of the Shahi Imam. Anyway, so he was going to have a Muslim march on Ayodhya to coincide with some Hindu festival there. And so you see, Rajiv Gandhi smelled the bloodbath in the making, and so he invited Sai Chabudin. He said, we want you to call off this march. What do you want in return?
Mhm.
And so one of the things he wanted in return was the ban on this book.
Okay.
And
Satanic
so
verses.
you see, Rajiv Gandhi was a practical man. He said, "Yeah, free speech. It's all very nice, but I have the peace to keep, so I'll ban this book."
Okay. Thank you, sir.
So at that time, I discovered this. I mean, you see, in those days, I was an avid reader of newspapers. So every morning I bought a few newspapers. At that time, I remember I had some wart or something on my foot, and what happened, what helped against it was mud. so So you see, we lived just next to Asighat in Varanasi, and so I went there every morning with my newspapers, and so I took off my shoes and my socks, and so I went to stand in the water, in the mud, and then I read my newspapers. It must have been quite a sight. So for instance, Frontline. Which still exists.
Yes.
I noted, because many things that I read in those days don't exist anymore. So that still exists, and yes, that may have been, or that may still be, a communist paper. Nevertheless, it was a very good paper. It was very well made. You see, people from Frontline, if you're watching, you see, I do not mind at all if you use this last sentence as a publicity clip for Frontline. I really hope that Frontline has a long life and many readers. I really hope that you keep on, doing what you're doing. So in Frontline, there was an interesting debate between two factions of the left. So the hard left, the communists, they were against this ban. You see, traditionally, the left was against religion. As Karl Marx said, the criticism of religion is the start of any criticism. So for them, it was simple and obvious. Of course, we are against this ban. If people want to lampoon religion like Rushdie is now doing, well, let them. But the soft left, essentially the Congress party, and at that time there was not much of a Samajwadi party and so on, and all those parties essentially supported Muslim causes in general to cater to their electorate. And so they somehow discovered reasons to support the ban. People like M.J. Akbar, like Khushwant Singh. So, they saw a difference. There are general books that deserve to be protected against bans, but then there is this one. They saw the difference. And so this intrigued me. I thought, so there's a secular reason to ban criticism of religions. And then I started researching that. I soon found out that Rushdie affair was, in fact, an offshoot of the Ayodhya affair, which I then started researching. So that's how one thing led to another.
True, sir. Very true. Sir, so you have always pursued independent inquiry, even when it went against the mainstream or academia.
Yes.
So that's how we respect you, sir. And like you are like a lighthouse to us, the new readers. So when you started studying Hindu civilization, there was very little institutional support and all kind of frameworks that
Yeah.
it was not there. So what key experience shaped your approach towards this? Like how you approached everything academically and like writings and all, you published many books and all.
I don't know. There was nothing deep behind this. Part of it was simply the circumstances. So, you see, I noticed that there was nothing about the Ayodhya affair, certainly not academically. And so I thought, oh, well, that's, I should do that.
Yes, true.
Then I ran into Sitaram Goel and Ram Swaroop. And so then I got a totally novel vantage point and new information that nobody else had, or at least outside India. So I wrote a little journalistic book about it.
Yes.
Nothing special, but the one thing that was special about it was that here at last was a Westerner who supports the pre-existence of a temple.
Yes.
Now, that was really nothing special. In fact, there was a consensus that, of course, there had been a temple there. There had been a court case in 1885, 86, where all parties concerned, including the local Muslims, including the British, including the judge, agreed that there had been a temple there, that had been demolished to make way for a mosque. But, said the judge in his verdict, as this happened 300 years ago, it's too late to remedy this grievance.
Mm-hmm.
But so about the facts of the case, there was no doubt at all. And so in 1989, suddenly you see a case had like erupted, had somehow come about, because the eminent historians had decreed that there had never been a temple there. And so suddenly you see in all the newspapers and so on, they sided with the eminent historians, partly because of their titles that had some authority, but partly because, of course, it was the good cause. It was against the Hindu nationalists. So, of course, that is, they didn't need to think twice about what side to choose. So, because of this whole artificial controversy, what I had to say about the history of the site suddenly became news. And that then opened a lot of doors for me in Hindu nationalist circles. And today, of course, they make publicity and so on like any party does. Back then, the RSS movement was very secretive. It very much distrusted outsiders, and especially Western India watchers, who were deemed, and rightly so, to be prejudiced against Hindus. So suddenly for me, you see, that hurdle fell away, which is when I decided to write a PhD about the political Hindu movement.
True.
Yeah.
So, sir, like those who are working in this indological studies or Hindu nationalism and they write about it, today we have like a kind of framework. So we can write, but not that much expressively. So what will be your suggestion to this new researchers? So how should they move forward in this regard?
Well, I have nothing to say about that. I mean, you see, research is, you go look at the data and you analyze the data. And if there's anything interesting to conclude from it, you write that down and you publish it. I don't know what more there is to say about it.
Most
of course, in every case separately, you have to look, what kind of data, what kind of analysis, and so on. Yes, obviously.
Yes, true. Most of the time, what we as a researchers, we feel that there is always a Western accreditation that we ask
Yeah.
for. Like we want our research papers to be published in Sage, and we want that to be published in Springer, and from Western academia.
Mhm.
So that is the problem which I see. Like
Yeah.
how you see that, how to
Well,
dismantle this.
yeah, that is evolving, but slowly. Um, you see, the depreciation for India is becoming less and less and less, but very, very slowly. This is simply because India is becoming more important and more powerful. So economically, India is what, the third power now worldwide, I think. Then, I mean, if you come from the West or from Japan or anywhere to India, you notice the difference. If you come here like every winter, to cite a typical case, I'm not very different. When the temperature is fine here, you see every year that India has fairly dramatically advanced.
Very good.
And so that helps India's image. So that will, in the longer run, also take away the bias against the seriousness of the Indian output.
Yeah, true.
Because that was always looked down upon. Like, it used to be said, and I'm not saying anything, I'm just quoting, that a PhD thesis in India is the same level as a master's thesis in the West.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. So you see, I suppose, but I mean, here my knowledge is very limited. India is a vast place, but I have the impression that is also changing. And so what sometimes I do read of the Indian output is getting better. But here, I mean, some expertise really is needed for that. At any rate, you see that is more or less the trend. So India is going to be taken more serious, but in the fields that concern us, I don't see that yet. There, you see, anything coming from India is Hindutva, and India is only taken seriously if a project is patronized by the West somehow, institutionally, or through the person assisting you in your PhD thesis, or supervising it, or whatever. There must be some Western connection. That is still true in sociology and stuff.
So we can say that yoga, which we call yoga today,
Yeah.
when it boomeranged from West, like we are more accepting to that because it boomeranged from the West. So that is the
Yes.
question.
Yes, that's what they call the pizza effect.
So I wanted to know about how you look at Hindutva, because Hindutva has been evolving since the time of Tilak and Savarkar. Savarkar's Hinduism, and now in modern political form, it has been changing. How you look at it from narrative perspective or your perspective?
It so happens that I am just busy reading Arun Shauri's book about Vinayak Damodar Savarkar, who coined, or at least who launched, the term Hindutva. So he concludes with the line, "Save Hinduism from Hindutva."
Okay.
Yes. Now it so happens that when I read the booklet Hindutva, my dude didn't like it so much. You see, about Savarkar's career, it's impressive. He he suffered a lot more for independence than Gandhi or Nehru. Nevertheless, his definition of Hindutva is not good guidance for the Hindus. You see, he tries to cast the pluralistic, very diverse Hindu society into the mold of nationalism, which I think is wholly misconceived. There are a few things wrong with nationalism. So one thing that even Mohan Bhagwat, the Sarsangha Chalak of the RSS, has recently understood is that in terms of publicity, it's not a good logo for Hinduism, in the sense that nationalism, whether Hindu nationalism or any nationalism, has a bad name. You see, before the First World War, all the nations of Europe were becoming nation states, and more emphatically so. And stuff that didn't exist before, like a national anthem, was very cultivated. And then after the First World War, you would think that then, everybody had a hangover from this nationalism. Well, on the contrary, that's the real heyday of nationalism. And so every musical band, every gymnastics association, whatever, they all marched in uniform and so on. It was all very military language. And that's exactly what you find in the RSS. Founded in 1925, just in the heyday of nationalism. And or in the Hindu Mahasabha, 1922. And you see, after the Second World War, this came to have a bad name. Now, the RSS somehow was not aware of what happened in the rest of the world. They, kept on using the term nationalist in a very complimentary sense.
Okay.
And so, they weren't aware that something was wrong with it. And so I've seen the last 10 years or so how there has been a certain churning in RSS circles, especially in the India Foundation. And so they saw this publicity problem. But then, soon after, they got to know that book Nationalism by Yoram Hazony, who is one of the masterminds of the conservative movement in the West. He's from Israel, part Israeli, part American. And he points out that, after all, nationalism was a very necessary phase. And so what was good about it was that it took people out of their little world, and so made them part of a larger world, not yet mankind, but at least their nation. Like, for example, the German national anthem, Deutschland, Deutschland über alles. So many people think that means Germany above everything, meaning, a titanic, superiority complex. That has nothing to do with it. You see, Germany above every other loyalty. That is to say, don't be loyal to your city, Köln or Dortmund or whatever. Don't be loyal to your land, your country in the limited sense, the province that you belong to Bavaria or Rhineland or something, Prussia. and instead direct your energies towards Germany.
Okay.
See? So nationalism in the 19th century meant making the effort of coming out of your little world and participating in a larger world.
But so we.
So you see, that is very much a theme in the case of Hindu nationalism, because in Hindu society, but par excellence, you have a dividedness in smaller units, in language groups, in castes, and so the mission of Hindu nationalism, as conceived by Savarkar, was precisely to transcend all these little divisions. That's why, perfectly logically and totally against the stereotype, Hindu nationalism has always been anti-caste.
True.
Because, I mean, many, India watchers, and including the Indian left, portray it like this, that Hinduism is caste, holy caste, nothing but caste. And so Hindu extremism is extremely pro-caste.
Okay.
See?
Yeah.
And whereas, you see, out of the logic of nationalism is, of course, anti-caste. It's against any divisions within Hindu society.
True.
So, you see, there are a few good things to say about nationalism. And so the transcending of the also the division in Dravidianism and tribal and whatever. No, you see, get together. That's part of the message of nationalism. Then, of course, in 1925 to 1922, this is entirely associated with the freedom movement. There is, of course, I know, a line of propaganda by Congress and so on, that Hindu nationalism had nothing to do with the freedom movement. That's total nonsense. It was, of course, part of the freedom movement. Much of the typical traits of the RSS stem from founder K.B. Hedgewar's career among the Bengal revolutionaries, which was part of the freedom movement. Not the Congress part, but nevertheless part of the freedom movement. The Hindu Mahasabha, until 1935, was a lobby within Congress, was very formally part of the freedom movement. So again, here nationalism has certain nobility letters, so to speak. It was part of the freedom movement. And in the pre-independence period, when you called yourself a nationalist, it meant you were part of the freedom movement.
Yeah.
And that was perfectly respectable. I mean, for a country like India, it's obvious that they wanted to be independent.
Oh, true.
And so that's what the name nationalism meant. Nevertheless, you see, times have changed, and the RSS ought to have the good sense of changing with it. But so then, fortunately for them, I guess, they discovered that book by Yoram Hatzoni, that again has a few good things to say about nationalism. So the idea of shedding the name nationalism, not much is coming of that. And now something else is happening, namely that they are emphasizing this nationalism at the expense of Hinduism.
Okay.
You see, in the foreign media, they still talk about Hindu nationalism. Like that book by Shauri that I am presently reading about Savarkar, that also, pretends that this is a Hindu movement. Right now there is a pro-Hindu government and so on. It's all into Hindutva. Whereas, you see, there is not much left of that Hinduism anymore. And I can perfectly understand that Shauri has had enough of Narendra Modi. I mean, he himself told me the inside story. But you see, what is wrong with Modi is not that he's a Hindu or that he's pro-Hindu, that he's a Hindu activist. He is not. You see, I mean, whatever is good or bad about him, it's not Hinduism. And so as far as I'm concerned, the most dramatic statement by Mohan Bhagwat is that every Indian is a Hindu. That's what he has said several times. And you see, Hedgewar or Golwalkar or Savarkar, any of that generation could never have said that. You see, they, of course, made a distinction between Indian and Hindu, a distinction which has been there in the definition of Hindu ever since the beginning. You see, the Islamic invaders brought in that term, which is a Persian term, and immediately gave it the meaning of an Indian except a Muslim.
Okay.
So it had immediately a communal meaning. It separated Hindus in the largest sense. I mean, Buddhists and tribals and so on, all those who were not Muslims, separated those from Muslims.
Okay.
You see, both eschatologically, in the sense that Muslims go to heaven and all the rest go to hell, right? Or in this world, Muslims should inherit the earth and all the rest can become second-class citizens at best. But so there was this distinction. And so the word Hindu had that meaning, and so it's consequent upon that meaning that then Savarkar radicalized it, bringing in modern notions of nationalism. It is fairly revolutionary for the RSS Supremo to declare that every Indian is a Hindu. You see, I mean, that just makes no sense. You can say, oh yeah, all Indians should be equal and so on. I'm all for that, for real secularism. I come from a secular state. When I was born, most people were Catholics. Nevertheless, Catholicism was not a state religion, and everybody was equal before the law, regardless of your religion. So I'm all for that. Not only because that's what I'm used to. Now that I've studied the matter, I think this is correct. This is how it should be. And so I'm totally in favor of that equality. Nevertheless, conceptually, it makes no sense to deny the distinction between Hindus, Muslims, and other religions.
So I'm a little bit curious because like Indians, how we see ourselves is that we have a long history background.
Yes.
So which part of history should be collected as civilization, our own civilization, and which should not be? That is the most recent narratives that has been built. Because for example, like should we consider Taj Mahal as the civilizational ethos or not, or other part of like the Kashmiri Pandits exodus or the Sindhi exodus that has been done in 1947 and this 1991-90 Kashmiri exodus. Should we consider that as exclusivism or inclusivism? That is the main question that has been in the academia right now. Also, what Hindutva means is like inclusiveness from Pind to Brahmand. So you have rightly said that we have to remove all the smaller or artificial differences that we have, like caste and women and everything like that. But today I have a question for you, that today we have certain elements in our society which has been politicizing this issue of caste, issue of women rights, and radical feminism has been spreading, even with wokeism and other type of these concepts are coming. So can we say what is the way out from this? Can we get some insights from civilizational, or how we can move forward in this?
Well, let's start at the beginning. I'll start with your first question.
Okay.
Okay. About civilization, right? Well, there are gradations, and so you have to be realistic about this. Some elements of progress in your history are very much part of the process of civilizing India, and you can be proud of those. And the more primitive stuff is also there, and you should remain aware that it's not all about material progress, though India has, of course, taken part in that. And it's a total mistake to speak about a civilization as something Western. You see, in world history, different parts of the world have taken turns at being the number one. Like at the time of the Harappan cities, in many material respects, Harappa was number one worldwide. Though in other respects it was Egypt, or it was Mesopotamia, or it was China. It was in some respects even New Guinea, even Mexico. So, in some respects, India was number one, and in others it was not. And okay, so what? That's how it was. So you see, I'm all in favor of progress in all respects, but you see, those that specifically happen to be Indian, you may afford to be proud of that. Yes. I mean, like, there are a few that are stereotypical, like the zero. And some are more sophisticated. I mean, not too many people know exactly about, what has been done by Indian mathematicians. In some respects, India was number one. Things that nobody knows about, like, for example, you have the sequence of Fibonacci.
True.
Fibonacci was an Italian around 1200 who brought the Indian numeral system into Europe, replacing the cumbersome Roman numerals. He called it Arabic numerals, because he had them from the Arabs, not knowing that the Arabs themselves called them Rakmul Hindi, which means Indian numerals.
Yeah.
So, he did not try to take the honor for himself. He recognized it was of foreign origin, but, he didn't go all the way. He didn't do the right honor to India. Anyway, so he also is known in Europe for that number sequence. 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, and so on, meaning the number sequence in which a number equals the sum of the two earlier numbers.
Okay.
So 1 and 1 is 2, 1 and 2 is 3, 2 and 3 is 5, and so on. Now, that has a number of properties in the natural world, and in pure number theory, that's a special thing. So that's associated in Europe with Fibonacci. And in reality, that was discovered, as far as we know, about, 2000 BC by Pingala, an Indian mathematician of whom 99% of people in the world, including the majority in India, has never heard the name. In fact, that's a general phenomenon, that so many things about India, even though very large in size, are just unknown. Like, for example, the language of which people don't even know the name. They, of course, don't know the language, but they don't even know the name of the language. To my knowledge, the number one is Telugu. You see, Tamil, of that, they know the name. Because, you see, Tamils come in the news once in a while, like in the civil war in Sri Lanka, whereas Telugu, Canada, you know, when people hear Canada, they think of the country Canada. But, yeah, they don't know that there is a language called Kannada. So, you know, there are very many aspects of India that are important, that are objectively, historically important, yet that nobody knows about. So, you see, this is evolving. Like in the West, you have a premium on anything foreign. You know, you can score if you can show that something has a foreign connection. I mean, I see on Twitter so many Hindus who are still, you know, slandering the West, saying, "Oh yeah, they all do this for, you know, self-flattery and praising themselves and so on." That's not the case at all. You see, among Hindus, I see that. And I understand, you see, they have been wrongly depreciated for a long time. So there is a certain overcompensation, nothing wrong with that. Nevertheless, that's not the case anymore in the West at all.
True.
And strictly speaking, there was not much of it even before, because the West is very heterocentric. It puts its civilizational center outside itself. It's only the last few centuries, with the spurt of scientific progress, that finally there is something in England, in Germany, and so on to be locally proud of. But so everything else comes from elsewhere. The alphabet comes from the Phoenicians, and the numeral system, well, from the Romans, but you know, now from India. And so on. The Bible comes from the Middle East, and you know, everything comes from somewhere else. It's like nothing we invented. Well, logic and so on, and even that only in a far corner in Greece. So most of Europe has only received, has only started inventing things the last 300 years. So that's the difference with India, where the center is for most things in India itself.
So as we were talking earlier, that everything that boomerangs from West, we try to accept that, but
yes,
we should,
that's the pizza effect. I mean, the name comes from the fact that in Italy, pizza was, you know, leftovers. You know, when you had nothing to eat, but you had a few pieces of bread and some vegetable or so, you just put it together. That was it. So that was, you know, for poor people. And then when in America they discovered pizza, then it became popular, and then it returned to Italy. And so that same effect you have with certain Indian things too.
True, very true. So, sir, this opens a very large Pandora box of my questions. The question which I want to ask you now is, there has been terminology that has been used in India for changing the name. Like, should we call it India or should we call it Bharat? Because Bharat, like, it has our own name. So, what is your idea of that?
Yeah, there we have it again. Chauvinism, nationalism. You know, oh yeah, India bad because of, you know, Alexander and Queen Victoria and so on, whereas Bharat, that's native. Well, you see, the name India, of course, is also native. India is the Greek version of the Persian version of Sindhu, the name of the Indus River. So originally, a Hindu means someone living on or beyond the Indus River, meaning an Indian. And so the Greeks made, or the Romans made it into India, and that's how it returned to India under the British. Note, by the way, that the ancients, the Romans who came to trade in Kerala, or, the Chinese monks who came to Nalanda and so on, they had no problem recognizing India. You see, they made a distinction between Central Asia and India, between Arabia and India and so on. For them, there was an India. Here, there are secularists who say, no, there was never an India. It was all fragmented and so on. No. You see, of course, there was difference, but there was also unity.
Yeah.
And so that's fine. Anyway, so the word India comes from an Indian word. Yeah, it's not that foreign. And as for the name Bharat, I'd be careful. If, like the BJP, you make every effort to be recognized as secular, which the seculars are never going to concede to them, but they keep trying. So you see, they want to be secular. Well, in that case, they should settle for India. You see, India is named after a river. You see, anyone of any religion needs to drink, you see, and needs water for transport and for, industrial production and so on. Water is like life. So the name India is as secular as you can get. By contrast, the name Bharat, now there I'm not so sure.
Okay.
What is the name Bharat? What does it mean?
It comes from the three people that was a historical.
Yes. Yes. Just like the name Alexander, is used by numerous people, but for all of them, it ultimately goes back to Alexander of Macedon. So similarly, there are many Bharatas, after whom Bharat is named, the descendants of Bharata.
Yeah.
And so you have like the brother of Rama, it's called
yes.
Bharata. The choreographer after whom we have the dance form Bharatnatyam. And so on. So we have many of these people. But who are they named after? Who is this Alexander equivalent, Bharata?
But there is also etymological sense to the name, like Bharat, the person who is going towards light.
Now, that may be a folk etymology, but there's nothing against it. I mean, Bha means light, so Bharata means inclined to the light, oriented towards the light. So that I'm all for it. Great name. Whether that really is the origin of the name can be, debated. But at any rate, there's nothing wrong with the etymology of the name. You see, other people say it is from the root bhr, which means to carry. And so it's a past participle. So it means carried, maintained, which is said of the fire. So it's an epithet of Agni. And so, because people have a certain shyness vis-a-vis God names, they use the epithets instead of the name itself. So they never, will baptize, so to speak, a newborn boy as Agni.
True.
In the Vedas, nobody is called after any of the gods. But an epithet of the god, now that's something, that's already acceptable. Right? So ultimately, the name does effectively mean fire. And he is also associated with the fire. You see, he produced fire at the time, and perhaps not everybody was even able to make fire. And at any rate, he's associated with the fire sacrifice. Fire sacrifice didn't always exist. And so it becomes specific for the Vedic tradition. The normal form of worship is the libation, which means that you pour water or milk or blood over something that represents the deity.
Okay.
And like, for example, the word God is related to the Sanskrit word huta, from a verb hu, which means to worship. So a god is the worshipped one.
Okay.
And so it's a pre-Christian term, and it can refer to anything that is being worshipped.
True.
It's the Christians who then, specialized it and made it a synonym of Yahweh. But so that root God, that is related to the Dutch verb gieten, which means to pour. That goes back all the way to the ultimate meaning of pouring as the act of worship par excellence. And so using the fire as a medium for worship is something fairly unusual. And so you have that with the northwestern tribes, the Druhyus, the Anus, and the Purus. The Puru tribe is the Vedic tribe. It's in the, in Puru society that the rishis start composing these hymns that then, you see, get bundled together as the Rigveda. And so they start a fire. Still pouring is a part of it, because you pour ghee or something into the fire, and then the smoke takes it up to the heaven, to the gods. So libation is still part of it, but so specific for the Vedic tradition is the fire ritual. So that's associated with Bharata, and what is more, the court priest of Bharata, who, according to a much, much later story in the Mahabharata, was the adoptive son of Bharata also, namely Bharadwaj. Bharadwaj, that's it, yeah, Bharadwaja. He's the oldest, the very first Vedic rishi. He composes the first hymns, but so he testifies about King Bharata very curtly. And so he associates him with the fire, and it's the fire that, was produced by King Bharata and so on. So Bharata was actually no small matter. You see, some kings are named after, or are praised because of their conquests or because of their great building projects or something. This King Bharata was special because he founded the Vedic tradition. So in August 2023, the Indian Prime Minister announced some G20 function that was going to be presided over by Draupadi Murmu, the president of Bharat. So even not only in the Hindi text, but in the English text, he used the term Bharat.
Yeah.
Also because at the time the term India was a bit contaminated by being appropriated by the opposition parties. At any rate, he could do that. You see, this is the official name, India, that is Bharat.
That is Bharat article.
But what he did not do was to call Draupadi Murmu the president of Veda land. That's actually what he did do, only he didn't use that word.
Yeah, true.
But the meaning of the word is Veda land. So imagine that the newspapers had headlined, get together presided over by the president of Veda land. Now that would have been a shock. And there would be a communal, and yet that is what he did, essentially. So you see, the name Bharat is a very good term. I'm all for it, but it's a communal term, so to speak. It's very much a Hindu term.
It's very much to our own self, because Vedas like are the first knowledge system, and which does not go with Hinduism or Christianity or everything. It's called for Ano Bhadraha Kratavo Yantu Vishvata. Let knowledge come to us from all the side, and all the inclusivity that is there.
Yes. The Vedas are very inclusive. You read the last hymn of the Rig Veda, which explicitly said, okay, let all the tribes come together and, sit around the fire and, unify our thoughts and so on. It's, kumbaya, it's, let's all get together. And so it's a very good text, to preside over the unity of India.
True.
And so originally it was the tradition of one tribe living in one small area, about as big. I always make a comparison with Belgium. It's like the northern half of Haryana. That's where it all started. So that dynasty conquered a little bit, especially Sudas in the Battle of the Ten Kings. But even then, you see, at its largest expansion, it was less than 1/4 of the subcontinent. And then later it kept on expanding, not politically, not militarily, but culturally, in the sense that by then the Vedic tradition became very prestigious. It also became the backbone of a number of sciences.
Yeah, true.
Mathematics, astronomy, and especially linguistics.
True.
You see, for astronomy, you could say, that was the Indian branch of, something that had an Egyptian branch and a Chinese branch and so on. Linguistics was totally Indian, remained a purely Indian science until the 19th century. So anyway, you see, the Vedic tradition became very prestigious. And so everybody wanted to be part of it. The Dravidians, you see, they invited the chanters, the reciters of the Vedas, come settle here. We give you special neighborhoods, special villages, we give you tax exemption and so on. We want you to come and confer the prestige of the Vedas on our dynasty. So that's how the Vedic tradition spread all across India.
True. So we started with academic polarity, how polarity works, and then we went through frameworks and narratives, and now it is the truth that we see ourselves, how we are, and how our culture and civilization is. So,
you see, I understand that some people have a bit of a problem with this, but you see, in the past, religion was all over the place. It's perfectly normal that a country has a religious name. There are many others. Like in Latin America, everything is named after, the Virgin Mary of the Good Winds, Buenos Aires, or of the angels, Los Angeles. You see, those are all religious names. San Francisco, San Fernando, Santa Cruz, and so on. There's Egypt. The name Egypt is named after the god Ptah, the falcon god, and so on. I mean, religion is all over the place. The European Union. You see, here you had the same problem as in India. You see, the liberal elite couldn't live with the fact that Christianity was at the origin. Of course, you see, Christianity as the religion of Europe, that's a bit doubtful in the sense that it came and replaced the native religions of Europe. Nevertheless, you see, as an ex-Catholic, I have no problem admitting the role of Christianity in the unification of Europe.
True.
So you especially had the Emperor Charlemagne, who conquered a part of Europe that was practically equal to the first shape of the European Union, or the European Community as it was called at the time, 1957. And so then later it has expanded and now covers much of the whole continent, the whole western subcontinent of the Eurasian continent,
True.
as I should properly call it. But so all these earlier religions, they were tribal religions, they were local religions, and there was a certain like translatability between these different religions, like Woden among the Germans was the same as Mercury among the Romans and so on. Nevertheless, there was no pan-continental consciousness.
True.
And so that's the church that brought this. That's, I may like it or not, but that's what happened. And so the secular, European elite didn't want to recognize that. You see, when they made a proposal of a constitution for Europe, they left out that Christian part. I mean, in the preamble, there was something about the history of Europe, and that they couldn't bring themselves to recognizing that. So that's the same problem you now have in India. So they would prefer to wish that Vedic history away, but it's there.
It's there. And that's how Sanatan works. It is Sanatana.
Yes.
It will be in future also. So, sir, now we will have to end this podcast. But before going, we will have some quick, fast questions if you would like.
Right.
So, I would like to ask 5 books which every Indian must read. Apart from your books, we will read that. We have to read that to understand more about you.
Well, Sheikh Antalageri, his book about the out of India theory. In 2000, there was a book called The Rig Veda, a historical analysis. If you start, probably read the sequel, The Rig Veda and the Avesta, the final analysis, 2008. Because, this is a debate that is going on. It's not over yet. And it's silly, to stand by and not know what it's all about. So the out of India theory is explained there. And Talageri has contributed other things apart from the facts of history. Like, for example, many people in India think that everything comes from the Vedas. All the North Indian languages come from Sanskrit. He shows that this is not correct.
True.
Sanskrit was one of a number of dialects, mutually understandable, but already a little different, and growing into Bengali, Gujarati, and so on, becoming really different languages. And similarly religiously, so you have the Vedic tradition, which is different from, Murti Puja, which is different from goddess worship and so on. So you have a number of different strands that together make up the Commonwealth of Hinduism. So this Talageri I certainly want to emphasize. And then somebody with whom Talageri is not in agreement, Jijit Nadumuri Ravi. He wrote this trilogy about geography of the Vedas, of the Ramayana, and of the Mahabharata. So there has been a lot of confusion about the historical dimension of these writings. And so I was busy with that, but there are certain aspects that I not only didn't see, but even was totally surprised when I learned the real story. Because the history of the Mahabharata I had more or less figured out. The history of the Ramayana was a total surprise to me, including the geography of the Ramayana. Where is Lanka? Okay, I won't tell the answer. Read the book. Those two certainly. Maybe. I don't know if Arun Shauri now wants to be reminded of his earlier work, but some of his earlier work is very important. A secular agenda, the world of fatwas. Then I was not so interested by his book about Ambedkar because I had studied Ambedkar from the primary sources before. But I think for most Indians, it will be very useful to read that book.
Okay.
It's probably what cost him a minister's job in the first Modi government, because apart from perhaps the personal equation, I don't know, but you see, politically for the BJP government that is now very pro-Dalit and pro-OBC and pro-Ambedkar and so on, you know, he was the face par excellence of the rejection of this whole reservation policy.
Okay.
You know, he wrote a book, what was it called? Bending over backwards or something.
Okay.
Backwards, that's the operative word. So it's a very correct, very necessary critique of this whole reservation madness that I myself am, like most people, of a very poor background, and my grandparents did not have reservations. There started a certain social policy, but it did not take the form of reservations. And you see, we have also worked ourselves up. I mean, like lower middle class, but you know, we have a normal life. We do not constantly have to fight against poverty. So you see, India could get somewhere without reservation. It is not true at all that you need reservations.
True.
Just, you know, just saying. So you have, you know, Shauri, who wrote that in great detail and who thereby displeased the present government, that in spite of the caste remedying policies that the RSS used to propose, that Savarkar used to propose, are now completely falling for this, you know, Janata, Samajwadi type politics of reservation. You know, that perpetuates casteism, that aggravates casteism. So I'm not for that at all. Okay, a fourth book. What is another important book? Well, what I thought was a great book, but I understand that this is not going to interest many people, was the Parashara Tantra.
Okay.
Parashara Tantra. That's a book about astronomy, dating from 1500 or so BC. And so it's rather similar to the Vedanga Jyotisha. So it shows that there was already an advanced astronomy at the time that Max Muller said the Vedas were being composed. Effectively, they are post-Vedic. They presuppose a complete Vedic corpus. They prove, because their chronology is absolutely clear. You see, it gives a number of astronomical data that make clear, you know, that this was written in the middle of the second millennium. The Vedas are like third millennium, perhaps even partly fourth millennium. So completely incompatible with the Aryan invasion theory. So I thought this was a very important book. It is not about the Aryan invasion debate, yet by implication it is devastating for one of the contending theories, namely the Aryan invasion theory. Then perhaps something more opportune. Yes. For you know, today's politics, extremely important, though as a topic completely ignored. In fact, I could mention two books here, you know, because they're two sides of one coin, namely Ananda Ranganathan's book about Hindus being eighth-class citizens, And Kaushik Gangopadhyay's book, what's it called?
Majoritarian myth.
Majoritarian myth. So, which completely wipes the floor with the common claim that the Hindus are ugly, vicious, overbearing majority, dominating India, and so on. That's not the case at all.
True.
There are a number of constitutional discriminations against Hindus. You see, when you say at some international forum that, oh, this so-called secularism in India is a sham, then they say, oh, yeah, because these ugly, vicious Hindus, blah. No, you see, it's just the opposite. I mean, you see, this is how you can recognize a totally incompetent India watcher if he thinks that secularism means secularism. You see, if he thinks, in India you have, at least in principle, equality between the religions. No, you have discrimination against the majority. And, if you think that this is impossible, remember apartheid South Africa. There was discrimination against the majority.
Yeah, true.
Okay? Now that there was very formal and so on. India is also very formal, but nobody knows about it. And nobody discusses it. On the op-ed pages in the newspapers, and so nobody will ever touch this. Even after Ranganathan and Gangopadhyay wrote a book about it, it's still not being discussed. Indeed, here there is really a conspiracy of silence. The opposition, of course, doesn't want to discuss any grievance that the Hindus might have, and the BJP ought to discuss this par excellence, but they too, of course, have every interest in looking the other way, because it makes very clear how the BJP is not doing its duty.
Yeah, true.
It's perfectly, very intently looking away from this issue.
True. Thank you, sir. One more question is, one major weakness that today we see in Hindus' intellectual movement. What is that weakness which you would try to point out?
Well, there is no strategy. You should read the Little Red Book by Mao Zedong. Yeah, I used to be a great fan of that. I remember at age 14, I bought it in the communist bookshop in my hometown. And later I read it in Chinese. So on page number 1, it says that a revolution is impossible without a revolutionary vanguard party.
Okay.
And you see, that counts for every serious political endeavor. Whether a revolution or any serious, any profound change requires a vanguard. It needs a strategy. It needs, first of all, formulation of the goal. Then it needs a leading group that keeps that goal uppermost in people's minds, that constantly relates the issues of the moment with that ultimate goal. How this can be, you see, an occasion for, fueling the fire, for, keeping that goal in mind, for contributing towards that goal. And then it has to listen to the masses.
True.
You see, it has to get feedback all the time. And so this is what a leadership group does. Now, among Hindus, this does not exist at all. There is no one who keeps the goal in mind. Initially, when the RSS started, that's more or less what we wanted to do. Now, of course, then already it had an anti-intellectual prejudice, which, hampered dysfunction. At the time they used to say, do you need a book to love your mother? In order to be a patriot, you don't need to study anything. You just have to feel emotions, just like Mahatma Gandhi, with a different focus, but emotionalism. Now, that's not going to get you anywhere. Whereas the left, you see, they never represented the majority in India, yet they controlled a lot. They influenced policy a lot because they used their minds.
True.
So, you see, that is totally lacking on the Hindu side. Then, you see, long ago, they still had something of a goal in mind. You see, whatever they wanted, it had something to do with Hinduism.
True.
And, even of that, they have lost sight. First, effectively, they didn't speak about it, but now they really mean it, you see, that they are into India. I wrote a book long ago, Decolonizing the Hindu Mind.
True.
And so whenever I go to a city and they hear that I'm there, I get invited to talk about the decolonizing part. The Hindu mind, in that they're not so interested. And indeed, you see, when I arrived there at the venue, I see that I am actually being announced, I was going to give a lecture about decolonizing the Indian mind. You see, that word Hindu has become totally taboo. You see, the RSS practices Hindu phobia. And so I give the same speech that I was going to give, except that I explain why this, India agitation is not going to get them anywhere, and why it's very much Hinduism that needs a certain political activism. Anyway, that's the situation. So there's no, pro-Hindu movement. The Hindu society is an orphaned society.
True. Thank you, sir, for this very insightful thought. And I think that new researchers who are working in this field and who are toiling very much, they will learn a lot from this podcast, and they will read all the books that you gave, all the thoughts that you have presented in your books. So throughout this discussion, I myself have learned a lot from what is academic polarity, how to bring that academic polarity to India, how frameworks are being made, how narratives are being constructed, and what is the truth behind that. And reading all your works will definitely, I think, the listeners and the viewers, they will learn how to do all this narrative stories, and they will try to find out what is truth and what is untruth, and what is the narratives that has been built by Westerners, mostly colonialism and this Marxist ideologies. So that is what I think everyone should know. So a very heartfelt thank you, sir, that you gave your time, your insights, and your dedication to unwrap all these things. Very thank you. And I think that listeners will have already enjoyed this, and they will enjoy reading all the books and your works. And thank you very much. I'm very much pleased.
Well, I also have to say thank you. You see, I thank the BJP for not pursuing Hindu interests, because that gives me a lot to talk about. And I very much like the Hindu audience, because that way I have something useful to say to them. And so I greatly enjoy this interaction with the Hindu audience. So more of it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It is my pleasure actually to be with you. Thank you. Thank you very much.